Cat's Eye from 1985 comes to us from acclaimed director and sometimes animal wrangler Lewis Teague, who not only wrangled the moggies in this one, but he also wrangled the St. Bernards in Cujo, and he wrangled the crocodilians in everyone's favourite monster movie from the early 80s set in Chicago, Alligator. So Cat's Eye is a little bit of a different beast for an anthology film. Most anthology films are inspired by EC's Tales from the Crypt. This one feels more inspired by, I guess you'd say, EC's crime suspense stories or shock suspense stories. And the whole thing has more of a Pulp Fiction type vibe, I guess you'd say, or a proto-Pulp Fiction vibe, because it came on the scene a lot of years before Pulp Fiction, and it does feel more like something like that than Creepshow or Tales from the Dark Side or anything of that ilk. And the reason being is this one was adapted from several Stephen King short stories you can find in the novel The Night Shift Collection by Stephen King, which is a short fiction collection of a lot of Stephen King's old Penthouse stories, Playboy stories that appeared in other men's magazines, and so on and so forth. The early short stories that Stephen King wrote to pay the bills when he was living in a trailer with his wife Tabitha and young children. So, for starters, I'd recommend the Night Shift Collection for anyone that's interested in Stephen King. It is one of his more intriguing published works, or collected published works. So this one feels, as I said, quite different to something like Creepshow, for example, or most of your horror anthology series or horror anthology movies. It does feel more like EC's crime suspense stories or shock suspense stories or something like that. The two original Stephen King short stories are Quitters Inc. and The Ledge, which appeared in the Night Shift Collection. And the Night Shift Collection did include a lot of, I guess you'd say, non-horror short fiction, along with the horror entries, of course, like Jerusalem's Lot, for example, and Trucks. Trucks was later adapted into Maximum Overdrive, a fun movie in its own right. So this one has sort of gone under the radar for a lot of years in terms of what people reference when they talk about anthology films. Most people generally do reference things like Tales from the Crypt or Vault of Horror from Amicus, or they reference Creepshow, Creepshow 2, or any one of a dozen other horror anthology films. But this one's quite interesting in its own right. It came along in 1985. It kind of has the feel of more the feel of a telemovie, I guess you'd say, than a theatrical release. But it was most definitely a theatrical release. I don't know why, but it does have that Trilogy of Terror telemovie feel to it. Maybe because of the tiny little goblin that does kind of conjure memories of the little fetish doll, or whatever it's called, in Trilogy of Terror with Karen Black. But this one was based on several Stephen King short stories from the Night Shift Collection. And you've got your third story, which is a kind of add-in. Maybe it was a late addition to appeal to the horror crowd. It wouldn't surprise me if two stories that are largely kind of crime themed, I guess you'd say, thriller themed. Didn't quite cut it in terms of the producers, and they wanted to round out this film with something more horrific, as it were. So Cat's Eye kind of opens with a bunch of member berries, of course. There's references to Christine in the credits. There's references to Cujo, as we see our feline protagonist, who the stories kind of wrap around. It's dodging all these hazards out in the streets, the mean streets of a city. It almost gets run over by the Plymouth Fury from Christine. Almost gets savaged by the Saint Bernard from Cujo. So this is the original Easter egg movie. One of the movies that did these sort of fun Easter eggs before it became a bit of a cliche, or a bit of a trope, especially nowadays. And the first story in this one basically concerns, it's called Quitters Inc., and it concerns James Woods, who's always great in whatever he does, always brings a lot of intensity, a lot of sarcasm, a lot of swagger, and he plays a problem smoker who's trying to quit, and he signs up for something that he definitely didn't sign up for, I'll just say that. Quitters Inc. is a organisation that uses some rather extreme measures to make people give up the cancer sticks, which James Woods soon learns. And it is quite interesting to watch this one now that I'm older. When I was a kid, I probably missed a lot of the subtext of it. I kind of probably had a lot of what was happening to the wives of the problem smokers in this particular short story go straight over my head. And it is a lot darker. It plays a lot darker now that you're older and hopefully wiser, and you realise exactly what's happened to these hapless spouses when the problem smoker gets the call and has to go down to the office and confront the consequences, I guess you'd say, of them not quitting. So this one is a bit of a parable about addiction, I guess you'd say, and it has a bit of social commentary. The main thing that Quitters Inc. has to say is that it really does stress that addictions of any sort, regardless of what kind of addiction it is, doesn't just affect the person, but it affects their loved ones in horrific ways, which is where this short story, where this segment of Cat's Eye kind of takes things to the most absurd conclusion, but in a sense, it is a conclusion that you could potentially draw. I believe Stephen King himself had some substance issues of varying kinds. Arguably, you could say that his work was never the same again once he was a quitter himself. Personally, I do prefer his earlier substance-addled novels and so on and so forth to his later works, where he just became like a bit of a cranky old man. But needless to say, Quitters Inc. is quite clever in conveying that that theme, that addiction doesn't just affect the person involved. It can be catastrophic to their family. I mean, this one sort of gives nods to things like Roald Dahl's The Man from the South, gives a fair sort of a heavy nod, heavy wink to that one. I think some of you may remember The Man from the South, which involved a trusty Zippo lighter and a wager over the said lighter lighting 10 times, and the loser starts losing fingers or loses his pinky. And we see something similar and something infinitely more horrifying in this nod to that particular Roald Dahl short story. And it is all the more horrifying in that it isn't exactly the quitter themselves who's risking things like fingers and torches and so on and so forth. It is their immediate family. So quite an interesting little short story, a memorable one that you won't forget too quickly. And It's one of the reasons, along with the other memorable segment from this film, which probably suggests why it isn't as fondly remembered as other anthology films, because it can be an uncomfortable watch at times. It's quite dark, it's quite nihilistic, and arguably it was probably too dark for audiences of 1985 to fully embrace at the time. They probably wanted something a bit more fun, like Creepshow, for example, or Twilight Zone the movie. And Quitters Inc. Goes into some pretty dark places, and places I didn't realise were so dark when I was a kid, but they're pretty stark as I watched it again the other night for the first time in a lot of years. Now, the second story in this one, not so much a wraparound story. The wraparounds are mainly the cat running around as director Lewis Teague tries to wrangle it. So the second one is a story called The Ledge. And again, this one's interesting in that it's about a vice, and that vice is gambling. So there's a running theme of addiction throughout this film, whether it's substance addiction or gambling addiction. And basically it's the story of a guy who's been having an affair with a very wealthy gambler's wife. The wealthy gambler finds out, and basically, in a similar fashion to the man from the South, he makes him a wager that has, of course, unintended consequences, I guess you'd say. So this one's quite interesting as well. It is the weaker story of the first two. It still is quite tense in its own right, but for some reason, Quitters Inc. does have a kind of plausibility, a kind of relatability that The Ledge really doesn't. I'm not sure why that is, but some of it does seem a little bit hard to swallow, I guess you'd say, and the concept's a bit more, or a little bit less relatable than the Quitters Inc. concept, but entertaining nonetheless. As I said, this anthology film is a lot closer in tone to something like Pulp Fiction, for example, or Four Rooms than it is to Creepshow or Tales from the Dark Side the movie, or Tales from the Crypt or Vault of Horror. It's more of an anthology as such than it is a horror anthology, but that's fine by me. Variety's the spice of life, but I think for that reason it wasn't as popular with horror fans as other Stephen King adaptations or as other horror anthologies. So the final story kind of fits more into the wraparound than the others. We see the cat basically arriving at none other than Drew Barrymore's house as a stray, and the parents begrudgingly let her keep it. They won't let her have it in her room because her grandmother, I believe, says that cats steal the breath of children. Apparently they sit on the chests of children and suffocate them, and that's a whether true or false, that's something that we've all heard over the years, and this movie makes the most of it. But it turns out that the cat stealing her breath is the least of Drew Barrymore's worries. There's a little goblin-type creature that actually wants to come in and try and steal her breath. And this one's basically about the vindication, I guess, of this cat in protecting young Drew Barrymore against this goblin, this little beastie, and becoming accepted as part of the family. So, not the most imaginative story. It does feel like a bit of a throwaway, sort of a late addition to this film. It's almost easy to imagine that it was going to be two anthology stories to begin with. Perhaps Quitters Inc. and The Ledge had a bit of a longer running time each, and perhaps it was decided by the powers that be that the film needed a bit of a more fantasy, horrific element, which is why the final story came to be. But it doesn't really fit in with the tone of the rest of the movie. It's a little bit of a letdown in a way, the final story. Even though it does wrap up the whole anthology in a nice little bow as a bit of a wraparound story. Tonally, it is quite different to the first two stories. Who knows why it was included? Maybe they thought that it needed, the whole thing needed lightening up because the rest of it was a buzzkill. But who's to say? The final story isn't really scary in any sense. I think that Drew Barrymore's life at the time was probably scarier than anything happening in this movie. She had her own demons. And I guess in that regard, Drew Barrymore herself kind of fits in with the running themes of Cat's Eye, which is about addiction and things like that, and is incredibly hard to overlook as you watch this movie. It is very much a three-story parable about addiction, and even though the last story doesn't have much to do with addiction, it does star Drew Barrymore, so it's impossible not to be thinking of that recurring theme when you're watching even the final innocuous story. So Cat's Eye is quite unique in the annals of anthology or horror anthology cinema. As I said, it's really not a horror anthology at all. It's more along the lines of something like Four Rooms or Pulp Fiction, with these interwoven stories, these little self-contained stories making up the one feature film. A lot of people don't really acknowledge the fact that Pulp Fiction is an anthology film at its heart, but it definitely is. And that kind of gets overlooked a lot of the time. So it may even be that Pulp Fiction was influenced by something like Cat's Eye, because I was thinking about Pulp Fiction quite a bit while watching this one and the similarities. And yeah, it isn't hard to imagine Quentin Tarantino being quite inspired by Cat's Eye while working on the script, or at least some of the elements here. So Cat's Eye is a bit of a, as with all great anthology movies, the stories are uneven. Some are great, some are okay, some are mediocre. The great one is, of course, Quitters Inc., and the movie kind of suffers from Quitters Inc. being the debut, I guess. It kind of reaches these heights that it never quite gets to again with The Ledge, or with the final story featuring Drew Barrymore and the cat and the little goblin that steals breath. So yeah, that is one of the missteps, I guess, is that the strongest story does happen first. But that's filmmaking, I guess, and that is the beauty of anthologies. So they are a mixed bag. You never know what you're going to get. And that is a part of the appeal of them as well. So one of the more forgotten Stephen King film adaptations, definitely far from the worst. There's a lot of worse Stephen King film adaptations out there, but even the worst ones I do find myself kind of sentimentally drawn to as I get older, and I feel like revisiting them, even if I know they're going to be disappointing. And I'll probably re-watch a few more of them as time goes on. They are a great little time capsule. Stephen King adaptations are really a symptom, I guess, of the excess of the 1980s. Basically anything with Stephen King's name on it was adapted quick smart into a mediocre movie a lot of the time. Sometimes a great movie, sometimes a poor movie, but the majority of them were just on that kind of mediocre level. But I'd say, thinking about them now, they're probably they're probably a fun watch on a lazy Sunday, so I'll probably check out a few more down the track. But as for Cat's Eye, from Lewis Teague, director of Alligator and director of Cujo, cool little movie to check out if you haven't seen it. As I said, not the greatest Stephen King adaptation, but not the worst either. Not sure if you've seen this one. If you have any thoughts on it, by all means, let us know in the comments. And if you did enjoy the video, if you're still here at this point, help a brother out. Please like, share, and subscribe. Or subscribe. Tell a friend. And the other one to be sure to check out is our mockumentary that we made a lot of years ago, Tabor Corn. Tabor Corn, I'll leave a link to that one in the description. Or you can just type in Tabor Corn full movie here on YouTube. It is the story of a cool little time capsule that'll take you to way back to 2007 when the movie was made. It's the story of two rival webmasters, one of whom loves horror, cult, and exploitation cinema. The other one loves mainstream cinema, and he's a bit of a water carrier for mainstream cinema. And the whole mockumentary is about their trials and tribulations, and lampoons a lot of the tropes, a lot of the cliches of film fandom, whether it is horror, cult film, or mainstream cinema. So if you enjoy this channel, you'll probably enjoy Tabor Corn. So check that one out. I'll leave the link in the description if you're interested in seeing Tabor Corn. Or, as I said, just search Tabor Corn full movie and it should come right up. So that's about all I've got. As always, I hope you take it very easy, and I look forward to seeing you next time.